All right. Good evening. This is part 16 of our series on the first chapter of Sanhedrin. I'm going to share my screen so we can all see the text together. And if you are watching this or listening to this at some point in the future and you would like the PDF, please email me at deborahclapper@gmail.com. Okay, so we are going to be continuing something we began last week, or before Thanksgiving, which is to interpret the psukim at the beginning of Devarim, where Moshe is giving instructions to the judges in the new court system that he's just set up, which is parallel sort of to the events at the beginning of Yitro in Shemot. And so let's just read through those psukim first, and then we'll go to the Gemara. The Gemara is not exactly going to deal with them in order, and we already dealt with parts of it last week, but let's hear the whole thing. Starting from Devarim 1:16. I commanded your judges at that time, saying, Shamoa ben achechem, listen between your brothers, ushefatatem tzedek, and judge righteously, or righteousness, ben ish uven achiv uven gero, between a man and his brother and his ger. And we dealt with that pasuk last week, and the between was taken to mean that both litigants have to be present before you can hear anything from either litigant. And the ger was taken to be referring to the material that they're fighting over. They're fighting over a home rather than that it's a person who is resident. But okay, moving on to pasuk Yud Zayin, which is what we're going to start with tonight. Lo takiru panim b'mishpat, don't recognize faces in judgment. Kakaton kagadol tishma'un, listen to the small and the big alike. Lo taguru mipnei ish, don't tremble before any man. We spent quite a lot of time on that phrase a couple weeks ago. Ki hamishpat le'elohim hi, who, because judgment belongs to God. We spent some time on that too. V'hadavar asher yikshe mikem, but any issue that is too difficult for you, takrivun elai ushemati, bring it to me, bring it close to me, and I will hear it. That's going to be where we're going to, our first thing we're going to start with. But one more pasuk, v'atzaveh etchem ba'itahi, and I commanded you in that time. So now Moshe is turning from talking about the instructions he gave to the judges to addressing Bnei Yisrael directly and saying, and you, the regular lay people, these are the instructions I gave you. Et kol hadvarim asher ta'asun, I told you all of the things that you need to do. Now that's just begging for interpretation, because what things? And we will get to that. Okay, so starting in the Gemara, though, we're going to start in pasuk Yud Zayin, where the second half of pasuk Yud Zayin said, "V'hadavar asher yikshe michem," the thing which is too difficult for you. And Moshe said, the thing that's too difficult for you, bring it to me, and I'll listen to it. Amar Rabbi Chanina v'item Rabbi Yoshaya, al davar ze ne'anash Moshe. Rabbi Chanina said, or maybe it was Rabbi Yoshaya, we have a problem in the tradition here. On this thing, meaning this thing that he said, Moshe was punished. Shne'amar vayikrav Moshe et mishpatan lifnei Hashem, because it says in the 27th chapter of Bamidbar that Moshe did not know what the rule was supposed to be in the case of the daughters of Tzlofchad, and he brought their case before God because he didn't know what the answer was. So going back to Bamidbar 27, which is, of course, in the chronology of the Torah, not going backwards, it's going forwards, because Devarim is not part of the chronology of the rest of the Torah. It's a sort of a reprise of a bunch of things. So in the order of actual events in the desert, the story of the daughters of Tzlofchad is taking place decades after Moshe said the thing that's too difficult for you. So what happens here is they're talking about how they're going to divide up the land among the men, I guess, the householders, who are going to be assigned ancestral farms in the land once they invade. And the daughters of Tzlofchad come forward and they say, and everybody always calls them the daughters of Tzlofchad, and I feel terrible for them because they absolutely have names. The Torah gives them names repeatedly, so we'll call them by names. Machla, Noah, Chogla, Milka, and Tirza came forward, and they stood there in front of Moshe and they said, it's not fair. Our father died in the desert. He didn't have a son. And why should our father's inheritance not go to his descendants just because he doesn't have a son? Basically, he was had he survived up until now, when you're talking about dividing land, he would have been entitled to a portion in the land. And now you're going to take that portion and give it to somebody else just because he doesn't have any sons. And that's not fair. We should be allowed to have what would have been our father's portion. So Moshe says, I don't know, and he goes to God, and God says, yeah, the daughters of Tzlofchad are correct. And then God articulates the whole order. It's actually not in that much detail, but he explains in at least some detail how inheritance works. That there's a preference for sons to inherit, but if there are no sons, then daughters inherit. If there are no sons and no daughters, then it goes to people who are higher up on the family tree. But the idea here seems to be that the fact that Moshe is publicly shown not to know what the rules are and has to publicly say, excuse me, please, I need to go talk to God. I'll get back to you on that. That's a punishment to Moshe because he arrogantly suggested in public that he knew all of the answers. And so now God's punishment for that is that, in fact, he does not know all of the answers. Okay. But Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak does not like that. Mat kifla Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, mikati vashmiachem. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak challenged it by saying, wait a minute, Moshe didn't say, I will tell you what to do. He just said, ushmativ. He said, and I will hear it. So it's not, there's a degree of arrogance in saying, I need to hear all the hard cases, but it's nowhere near as arrogant as saying, I will know the answer in all of the hard cases. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is suggesting that what Moshe means is, I gemirna gemirna. If I have learned the answer, then I learned it. V'ilo, and if it happens that I don't know the answer, then azil ma v'gemirna. I'll go and I'll find out. So that sounds like Moshe actually, in Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's universe, Moshe had already kind of planned for cases where he wouldn't know the answer. He anticipates that there are cases he won't know the answer. He's not that he thinks he knows everything so much as that he thinks he's the right guy to go ask God for an answer if that's necessary, which in the context of the narrative in the desert seems actually to be the way things work. So that might not be arrogance, that might just be reality. And therefore, Ela Chidetanya. So in fact, we should understand the story of Milka, Chogla, Noah, Tirza, and Chogla as follows. Re'uya Parashat Nachalot Shetikatev al Yedei Moshe Rabbeinu. The truth is that the passage about inheritance would have been appropriate if it had been written in the name of Moshe, as in like, and then God said to Moshe to tell the people saying blah, 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 right? Like the way that 99.9% of the legal material in the Torah is presented, right? That's it being said in Moshe's name. But it happens that Machla, Noah, Chogla, Milka, and Tirza are such amazing people that they deserve to have a part in the giving of the Torah. So it's not an insult to Moshe, it's just a compliment to these 5 amazing ladies who, first of all, had a grasp of the legal issues at hand and such that they were able to tell that a legal mistake was being made. And second of all, they have a love of the land of Israel such that they want the mistake fixed and they want the land. So they deserve that they should have a portion of the giving of the Torah. Okay. On the other hand, there is one other example in the Torah of a case where Moshe has to go ask God what the law is, and then he comes back and says what the rule is, and that is the Mikoshesh Eitzim, and the guy who is caught gathering wood on Shabbat, and they don't know what to do with him. They don't know what the rule is, so they lock him up. And then Moshe goes and talks to God, and God says, kill him. Okay. So Ruya Haita Parshat Mikoshesh Shetikatev al Yedei Moshe Rabbeinu. The truth is that the passage about the wood gatherer, or the idea of wood gathering, the fact that you're not allowed to do that on Shabbat and the punishment for it is death, it would have been totally appropriate if that had been written about as something which God gave to Moshe, and Moshe passed on to the children of Israel in the ordinary fashion of all the legal material. But the Mikoshesh, the wood gatherer, was guilty, and he deserved to have his guilt publicized for all time. And so he got recorded in this passage, not the same way as the ladies above with their being meritorious, but in that he's, the bad guy who had to, be especially put to death by God. He deserved to be recorded in history that way. But not, again, an insult to Moshe, just a comment on how guilty the Mikoshesh is. So it teaches you that we roll guilt onto the guilty and merit onto the meritorious. That means that we, if you are guilty, you're going to get the worst possible reputation, the worst possible punishment, and so on, because guilt breeds guilt. And on the other hand, if you're the good guy or the good girl, good woman in this case, then you will get the best possible treatment because you did the right thing. Okay. Steve, now back to our psukim at the beginning of the Dvarim. Although we're going both backwards and forwards, because we were in verse 17 and now we're in verses 16 and 18 that surround it. It says, Va'atzaved shoftechem ba'itahi. Right, the passage began, I commanded your judges. And then in verse 18, it says, Va'atzaved chem ba'itahi. And then I turned and I commanded you in that time. So what is this with God, with Moshe commanding these two different groups of people? He's commanding the judges and he's also commanding the lay people, presumably both of them in connection with the creation of this new court system. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Simlai. So Rabbi Elazar said in the name of Rabbi Simlai, Azhara l'tzibur shetehei emat dayan aleha. It's a warning to the community that they should be afraid of the judge. Presumably that means that they should follow instructions. V'azhara l'dayan sheyisbol et hatzibur. And it's a warning to the judge that he has to tolerate, he has to take care of, he has to carry the community. And it sounds like what Rabbi Elazar said in the name of Rabbi Simlai. What Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Simlai are saying is that this relationship is actually going to be unpleasant for everybody on both sides. Right? The people being subjected to judgment are going to need to subjugate themselves in a way that they're not going to enjoy, and God needs specifically, or Moshe needs in the name of God to specifically tell them that they have to do it or they won't. And on the other hand, the judges don't want to do it either. And the judges are going to suffer from the experience of having to impose their will on the people. And so it requires, it sounds like, a certain amount of divine bossing around to get either side to cooperate with this plan. Ad kama, so how much must the judges, must they bear? Amar Rabbi Chanan v'item Rabbi Shabtai. So Rabbi Chanan, or again, we have a damaged tradition here, and we don't know if it's either Rabbi Chanan or Rabbi Shabtai, one or the other of them said this, that it's connected to the pasuk in Bamidbar Yud Aleph Yud Bet, Ka'asher yisa ha'omen et hayonik. Let's get the whole pasuk. So in Bamidbar 11:12, Moshe is complaining to God. No, that's the wrong chapter. Sorry, one second. Here we are. I'm sorry. Okay, so Moshe is complaining to God. God has gotten angry, and Moshe is also upset because the people are all unhappy with the man, right, as usual. And Moshe says to God, Vayomer Moshe el Hashem, Lama harayot el avdecha, why have you caused evil to your servant? Right? Why were you terrible to me? But lama lo matzati chen beinecha, why have I not found favor in your eyes? Lasumet masa kol ha'amazeh alai, that you put the burden of this people on me. Anochi hariti et kol ha'amazeh, did I get pregnant with this people? Imanochi yelidtihu, did I give birth to them? Ki tomar elai sa'ehu b'chakecha, such that you tell me that I have to carry them in my bosom. Kasher yisaha omein et hayonik, the way that an omein carries a baby. Omein is a hard word to translate because it appears to be the masculine of the word for nursemaid, or nanny, or something of that sort. And in the feminine, it would certainly indicate somebody whose job was to breastfeed somebody else's children. Presumably men don't breastfeed children. On the other hand, in this case, the whole thing is a metaphor, and Moshe might just be masculinizing the word in order to make it be talking about himself. On the land that you promised to this people's parents. So Moshe basically is saying, God, you made a promise, possibly a foolish promise, to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And I don't really see how this is my problem. And I don't really see why you've burdened me with this group of people. They're terrible to me. They keep trying to kill me. They keep whining. And I'm done. I never volunteered for this to begin with, and I don't want to be here. Okay? And Rabbi Hanan or Rabbi Shabtai, whoever it is, seems to be saying that if you, Mr. Judge, think that you've got it hard dealing with litigants who don't want to follow instructions and witnesses who don't want to show up, and whatever, people who don't follow subpoenas or summonses, or people who disrupt your courtroom, whatever it is that's frustrating you, you've got nothing. Because look what Moshe was forced to deal with. And even if you were subjected to what Moshe was subjected to, you should still have to do what Moshe had to do, which is to suck it up and do what God wants anyway. Okay. Now we skip forward all the way to the end of the time in the desert. And we are in a conversation that Moshe has with Yehoshua. In the end of the book of Devarim, very shortly before Moshe dies, we're in Devarim 31:7 and 31:23. Those psukim are 14 verses apart. And in 21:7, Moshe summons Yehoshua. Vayikra Moshe liYehoshua vayomer elav. Moshe calls Yehoshua and he says to him, Le'enei kol Yisrael, in front of the eyes of all of Israel, Chazak ve'amatz, be strong, ki ata tavo et ha'am hazeh ha'aretz asher nishba Hashem avotam. Because you are going to come with this people to the land that God promised to their fathers, latet lahem, to give to them, ve'ata tanchilena otam, and you're the one who's going to help them inherit it, or cause them to inherit it. Okay, skip forward 14 psukim after Moshe writes the Torah and gives some more final instructions. Now God is talking to Moshe, and God gives Moshe more instructions. Moshe then writes down the new set of instructions, and then Moshe commands Yehoshua again after God talked to him. Vayitzavet Yehoshua bin Nun. He commanded Yehoshua bin Nun. Vayomer chazak ve'amatz, and he said to him, "Be strong." Notice it's almost exactly the same thing he said last time, although he seems to be speaking to him privately this time. Last time he was speaking to him in front of the people. Be strong, ki ata taviet b'nei Yisrael el haaretz, because you are going to bring b'nei Yisrael to the land, asher nishbati lahem, that I commanded, that I promised them. Va'anochi eya imach, and I will be with you. It seems to be, it's Moshe talking, but it seems to be the in the voice of God, right? I will be with you. I promised it to them. That sounds like God. Okay, and the Gemara wants to know, K'tiv ki ata tavo, uchtiv ki ata tavi. It says you're going to come with the people, and it also says you're going to bring the people, right? The difference is half of a very short line of ink, and it's subtle. You could almost read the one for the other. But it does seem to be like the attitude toward Yehoshua's behavior has shifted between the first piece and the second piece. And as I said, that one of the differences is that the second instruction is given in private, but that's not where the Gemara is going to focus. The Gemara is going to focus on the fact that that God talked to Moshe in between, and now God is talking. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, said Rabbi Yochanan, Amar lo Moshe Yehoshua. Moshe says to Yehoshua, you and the elders who happen to be in the generation are going to be with the people, right? It'll be a group effort. You and the elders will lead together, and you'll go with the people, and it'll be all cooperative. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but God says it really doesn't work that way. Tol makel v'hach al kad kodam. He says to Yehoshua, you need to take your stick and hit them in the head. Dabar achad ledor ve'ein shnei dabarin ledor. You have one leader in a generation, but you can't have more than one. It sounds, in fact, like Hashem is telling Yehoshua, according to Rabbi Yochanan, not to hit the people with a stick, but to hit the other elders. And presumably this is a metaphor. It just means assert your authority over them. It seems very unlikely that going around hitting elderly men on the head with sticks is like a useful governmental activity. But God says, if you try to rule on an equal footing with the other elders, you're not going to be able to get anywhere. That's not leadership. That's just a failure, because you can only have one person in charge at a time. Now, the Gemara does tend to assume that that's true, that you can only have one head of state at a time. Judging from the coalition agreements I've seen in my lifetime in parliamentary governments, I'd say it's probably true. But I'm certainly not an expert in political science. But that is what the Gemara is saying here, is that you can't have more than one leader at a time. And Yehoshua, if you're going to be able to bring the people into the land, you're going to need to assert authority over the elders in order to do so. Notice that the pasuk that we started with, I didn't quote that part. The pasuk that we started with says you're going to bring the people, you're going to go with the people. And Rabbi Yochanan seems to be assuming that the people in that pasuk, in both of those pasukim, are not the entire nation of the children of Israel, but the specifically the council of elders. And God says, no, you can't come with the council of elders. You need to bring the council of elders. You need to tell them what to do, and then maybe something useful can happen here. Okay, we are now switching to a completely different topic. Okay, but we are hearkening back to our Mishnah, which was a list of what kinds of judicial activities required how many judges on the court. And so we have here a Braita, which is both similar and related. And the Braita says, Zimun bishlosha. Now, Zimun is a confusing term because it means at least two different things. It means, I guess, inviting. And we're all familiar with the kind of Zimun that you do at Birkat HaMazon, where you have 3 adults who ate food, and I'm not dealing with the gender issue here. We could do a different share on that maybe sometime, but maybe we even did one last year. I don't remember. But one way or the other, you have 3 adults who ate bread, and one of them addresses the other 2 and says, "Let's bless God," and that's sort of the impetus for starting Birkat Hamazon, and then that person leads Birkat Hamazon. That's called zimun. There is also something called zimun, in which a judge or a court summons people to show up. So it could be a summons, or it could be a subpoena. It is not clear to me that halacha, at least that this Gemara, distinguishes between ordering witnesses to show up in court and ordering litigants to show up in court. As I understand it, that's the difference between a subpoena and a summons. And it may be that zimun applies to either one. But the problem here is that if all you have of this Breita is a fragment that's 2 words long, and the number of adults that you needed eating together in order to do a communal Birkat Hamazon was 3, and the number of judges who sit on a small court is also 3, then saying zimun is with 3, this tells me absolutely nothing about which context I'm talking about. It could be either one. Okay, so the Gemara says, "My zimun." What is zimun? What are we talking about here? Ilema birkat zimun. If we're saying that it's the blessing of zimun, which is the zimun for Birkat Hamazon, that's not going to work, because v'hatanya, we have another Breita that says zimunu Birkat Hamazon bishlosha, that zimun and Birkat HaZimun are both with 3. So that makes it sound like zimun and Birkat HaZimun are 2 separate things. But maybe you could say that it's naming the thing and then explaining what it is. V'chitema perushika mefarish my zimun Birkat zimun. And if you want to say it's explaining zimun, you want to know what zimun is? That's Birkat zimun. It's with 3 people, right? If you want to say that, which would be a little bit of a stretch in the language as we have it in the Breita, but not worse than some other things we've done to Breitas. It doesn't matter, because we have yet another Breita. V'hatanya zimun vishlosha, Birkat zimun vishlosha. Now we have it in 2 separate sentences in this Breita. Zimun is with 3, Birkat zimun is also with 3. So that makes it, as far as the Gemara is concerned, unambiguous that zimun and Birkat zimun are different things. Elamai zimun. Instead, what is this thing called zimun? Azmune lidin, summoning to judgment. Although, as I said, I don't know that it has to be necessarily summoning litigants. I think it can also be subpoenaing evidence or witnesses. At least we haven't seen any reason to believe otherwise. Ki hada amar Rava, like this thing that Rava said. Hani beitz lata dayane diatve. So if you had a set of 3 judges who were sitting, presumably in judgment, ve'azil shlicha de beidina, and the messenger of the court, the agent of the court, went ve'amar mipuma de echad, and spoke in the name of only one of them. All right, so we've got judges Aleph, Bet, and Gimel, and they're sitting there, and the shaliach of the court goes and says to me, Mrs. Clapper, Judge Bet says that you need to show up, but doesn't mention Judge Aleph or Judge Gimel. Lo amar klum. He has said nothing. Ad amar mishmei dekulu, until he says all of their names. He has to say Judge Aleph and Judge Bet and Judge Gimel all say that you have to show up, Deborah Clapper, go. And at that point, I am legally bound to show up, and I can have sanctions taken against me if I do. Hani mili below Yom HaDidina. But that's only on a day the court doesn't normally meet. Now, we've seen a variety of different levels of formality in this chapter about the judging of cases. We've seen cases where it looked like you actually had a court that was, constituting itself of experts in order to sit down and, maybe even in a courtroom and hear cases. But we've also heard about, lay people standing on street corners acting as an ad hoc court. And we also saw, I don't know if we saw it in the first chapter of Sanhedrin, we definitely saw it last year in a Gemara in Bava Metzia and in a number of other places where you just have like a rabbi lecturing in his classroom. And then people show up in the door of the classroom and say, hey, rabbi, we need help with the situation. And he judges a case right there in front of the students. Very often the students interact with him in the case about what the correct judgment is. And so I don't know exactly which of those scenarios we're talking about, but it sounds like there's a formal appropriate time for these judges to be meeting. There's also like times when they happen to be meeting, even though nobody other than the court could have anticipated that that's what they're doing. So Hanimili below Yom, that when we said that it doesn't count unless the messenger mentions the names of all of the judges, that's only talking about when it's not a court day. So if the court meets on Mondays and Thursdays, and it seems like everything happens only on Mondays and Thursdays in the Gemara, those are market days, then, on a Tuesday, if the court wants my attention, they need to send the messenger to speak in all three of their names. Aval b'yoma dedina, but on a court day, on a day when I should anticipate that judges Aleph, Bet, and Gimel are all going to be sitting in their, chairs in the gate of the city or wherever it is that we're meeting now. On that case, late lanba, which literally means we have nothing in it, but it means the thing that you said isn't true in that case. So what we're saying is on a court day, on a day that I should anticipate that the court is meeting, if the shaliach of the Beit Din shows up at my door and says, Deborah Clapper, you are summoned to appear by Judge Bet, I am now subject to the full sanctions of the court if I don't show up, even though these shaliach only mentioned one of the judges. Okay, and that brings us to the end of what I have here. Are there questions?
So why is that, Deborah?
Which part?
The last thing that you said. Why? You would think that if it is a court day and they're all sitting there, someone should summon you in their names. It should be in the names of all of them to give them all respect because they're all sitting there. But if they're not in the court, then it would make sense to me that if they say the name of just one, then that one is representative of the court.
So my guess would be, although I don't have formal knowledge of this, but my guess would be that if everybody knows that these three guys are constituted as a court today, then mentioning any of them sort of automatically makes everybody assume that we're talking about all three of them. Oh, Judge Bet, he sits with Judge Aleph and Gimel on Thursdays. That must mean the whole court. Like, I think that's what we're assuming that you would think. Whereas if I get a messenger showing up at my door, not on a court day, saying Rabbi so-and-so says that you need to show up, I could be excused for believing that it's just Rabbi so-and-so asking me to come.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay.
I think that's the difference. Although Rashi does not comment, and I am a little bit flying without radar here.
That's okay. It's probably not something that that Rashi thinks is unclear. So it's probably what you're saying.
Rashi's idea of what's obvious, unfortunately, includes a lot of things that I don't understand.
Yeah, I know. So are we to understand that in this context, zimun means to judgment and not to benching?
Yes. So zimun means summoning people to the court. So then it is also true that zimun of Birkat HaMazon requires 3 adults, right? That's right. Also true. It just happens not to be the topic of this break.
Right, because in the context, we're not talking at all about Birkat Hamazon, although I wouldn't put it past the Gemara to deal with something totally different in the middle of a sugya.
Correct. They're certainly not about that, but I think all they're saying is that this particular Breita is talking about judges, which is important from their perspective because they need a source that it requires 3 judges to summon people. And limiting the capacity of judges to summon people is actually a really important thing, because otherwise you're giving tremendous power to individual people who weren't necessarily supposed to have that much power over random individuals at a whim.
Right. And
we don't really want Rabbi Cheses to be allowed to, say, show up in my living room in 10 minutes, or you're not a member of Israel Sharon anymore, whenever he feels like it. Rabbi Cheses is a nice guy. He would never do such a thing, but you know what I mean.
Right, but he could do that on a court day. He just can't do it on a non-court day. So he could do it on Shabbos, but not on a weekday.
So it might be that if the Beit Din of Massachusetts was meeting and Rabbi Cheses was a dayan on it, which I don't know if he is or not, but let's imagine, then yes, if he sent a letter on Beit Din stationery with only his signature on it, we might still consider it to be a summons.
Right.
But since most people in our community don't even know that there is a Beit Din in Massachusetts, much less who sits on it. So if it depends on people coming automatically to the right assumptions, then I'm not sure that we're still in the same universe.
Probably. But zimun for benching is still called zimun, and in other contexts, it will be called zimun, and we'll just have to know that means zimun. So is there somewhere else in the Gemara where it says zimun b'shlosha?
Yes, there is a whole chapter in Masechet Brachot called Shlosha She'akvu Ka'achad.
Right.
That deals with issues of Birkat Zimun.
Right.
And it certainly speaks there about 3.
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see if I had other questions. I don't think so.
Okay. Then I believe I will see you guys a week from tonight.
Okay.
I hope there's a lot of disruption in my household at the moment, but I'm clinging to the normal.
Okay.
We're feeling very cliched. We were exposed to COVID over Thanksgiving, and now somebody has tested positive. And I really don't even know what planet I'll be living on by next Monday, but I hope to be sitting in this chair talking to you guys.
Oh, so someone in your house tested positive?
Yesterday.
Yeah, sorry to hear that.
At the moment, it's totally asymptomatic, so it's more inconvenience than anything else. But it's a little bit of a strange experience.
Do you work from home anyway, or are you working?
Now I do.
Yeah. So that's something to get used to. You might find that you enjoy it.
I did it for a year, more than a year.
Oh,
I was
that's
really
true.
enjoying seeing students in person. But
yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I really, really hope that a week from now, my life will be back to normal or close to it, and I will be sitting here talking to you guys again.
Okay, I hope so. Well, you'll let us know.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Okay. Good night.